people like you that need to address that reality of the fact that there's 4 billion people out there that can't afford a Lexus, right, that's hybrid. There's 4 billion people that can't afford a Prius that's hybrid. So that is the great question of the future. I just tried to frame that issue as significant. Would you like to do a follow-up? Because you may, I don't have the answer, but I think it's a great question. Ma'am?
I'm piggybacking on her question. There are lots of people in this country that can't afford these things either, and never will be able to. How are we thinking about the developed countries where people are at poverty level, not even that, middle class?
Yeah. One of the greatest things that's happening in computing is that some of the firms like Dell and HP are changing what they normally thought of as obsolescence and taking products that have functionality as philanthropic giveaways. So rather than giving money away, they're giving product away to regional needs, to housing, to supply affordable housing there with computing. So I think one of the answers is to address materials that are advanced, more advanced than we currently can afford, these people can currently afford, get them this new product in its earliest stage, even though the people of wealth may be buying the second and third iteration. You could still get the superior technology. And Schumacher called that technology with the human face, you know, in his chapter, Buddhist Economics. But I think you two are asking questions that are second-order questions that are exactly appropriate. When I write a book, I try and write about what I just learned from the last 5 or 8 years that I think might peak in the next 10 or 15 years. Your questions are really critical for the next 25, 30 years. I think it's a critical question about what is the relationship between sustainability and poverty? What is the relationship between sustainability and those in need? There are passages in the book. So the best way that I can describe it to you, and the way that I thought about it before we go to the next slide, is the reason I use the word going global and going green may collide each day, is that going global in its very structure, the way people debate globalization, is about more and more and more and more. While going green is about more efficiency, more efficiency, more efficiency, more efficiency. Until we recognize that difference, then we'll never align them properly. All right? And so that's why I think they're going to collide each way. I just got a signal that I have 15 minutes to conclude, but I think the best way to conclude is to answer these questions. Yes?
Actually, I thought I had on these two questions a possible solution. If you look at the history of disruptive, innovative technologies, they've always started off being more, costly, than the mainstream product or technology that they're substituting. But over time, the factors basically, the cost factors, go down considerably, especially against the mainstream technologies that are overtaken. So perhaps these newer and energy-efficient technologies over time will, and hopefully will, help drive cost down so that they will do that.
Eventually, waste will be hurt. Inefficiency will be hurt. Okay? That's the first thing about the severity of markets. The second about the swiftness of information is that you can now track where money should go. So this is another example of an Innovest product that John knows well about, where way back while we were doing this work within Toyota, I was using Innovest products to say, well, look at Innovest is in their own third-party way designating why Toyota is positioning for strategic profit opportunity and environmental benefit, and why GM is staying dead center of the picture, right? So the swiftness of information is allowing people to go out on the limb a little bit more in innovation. I can't tell you how many clients for the last 20 years said, we know we can do it better, but we're currently selling so much volume here, why should we even try? So the swiftness of information is allowing that verification of trying the superior. And then this whole idea of social response. Please keep in mind that you couldn't even bring up the word social as attached to capital until the Berlin Wall fell down. If you did that for 60 years, you were considered a socialist or a communist. And so these are rapid changes I'm talking about as I go on. So I would like to go to the very last slide and then start answering questions in the back. Sir in the back?
The developing world has been able to leapfrog in technology. In other words, everyone is using people who never used phones before start with cell phones. And I'm just interested in your comments on the ability, since if you look at the world in terms of population, the developing world is going to have the biggest impact eventually on the environmental issues, whether because they're now implementing technology for the first time that they can do a lot of green things that we had to do the other way because we didn't have the technology.
No, I think that's the key element of the future, in that just like America was the start before globalization of regulation, it's possible that the developing world will be the start of leapfrogging to frugality. I think that's what you're arguing, right? And I think that when I get emails from people in the developing Asian nations or people developing markets in Australia, I think this is happening very, very rapidly. So that there's a couple of things that I do want to say based on the recent questions. I'm thinking about your question about those in poverty. I would like you to look at, I went to Stanford Business School to debate worlding against two people. And one person is a total cynic on corporate social responsibility. And the other person is a person who has a Stanford business degree that could have been making a fortune as a finance person, who decided to create an organization called Leap Forward. I'd have you look at his organization. He found out that 62% of the Americans, this is to your question, almost 2/3 of us, at the end of the year of labor, do not have a net increase in work. Right? Do not have a net increase in work. In other words, it's likely that people who come to a breakfast like this are people who are accumulating wealth, but maybe 2/3 of the Americans are not. Right? So he created an organization to teach people the skills of savings and bank accounts and compounded interest and tax avoidance, and hopefully eventually estate planning. I think that it's interesting that sustainability is such a huge subject that a talk like mine is getting us to those subjects. And the subject of developing nations is sort of beyond me, but I think that's where ground for hope is. Sir.
I'm intrigued by your own pilgrimage from focusing on governmental regulation to now looking where the real action is, so to speak. I'd like to swing back to government for a minute because we've for many years seen state governments taking certain positions that quite advanced and enlightened, such as California auto standards and such. And it's often used to disparage the federal government for not being more enlightened. It seems like in some ways it's very natural, though, that more grassroots influences make more sense than some centralized one. Maybe that's the only way. My question regards today's extended campaign for the presidency, where I see very little in the way of people being part of the conversation, let alone direct the conversation toward some of the issues you're talking about. Do you see many glimpses of where national leaders can or should be part of this?
It's a great question. I think Richardson is the person from New Mexico that's the closest to bringing up some of these issues on efficiency and energy. I also think that the last few presidential debates have been so mean and bloody that people are evolving positions on competition in the environment silently as presidential candidates, and then they're waiting for power to transact them. So I think that's a cynical way of doing politics, but I think that's what's happening. See what I'm saying? Is that they may have positions, but they don't want to voice them because they think they're going to be slapped on the wrist. But I do think that government is the great enabler of improvement. I've already